Hi everyone, Dr. Remy from Pain Free and Fit and Posture Size. Today we have part 2 of our ongoing series on how to create a spondylolisthesis healing exercise program for yourself at home. We're going to be going over today various exercise modes and progression of exercises. Hope you enjoy. So in part 1 of this video series, we discussed the various planes of motion and how to choose exercises based on your unique instabilities for your spondylolisthesis. We're going to be talking about how to start designing that exercise program, how to actually put it together today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the modes of exercise. Modes such as the frequency of your workouts, the intensity of them, and the volume of them. Remember, before you begin any of this, any type of exercise you do for healing musculoskeletal injuries, including spondylolisthesis, has to be based on your unique RPI or reverse posture isometric. If you don't know what your unique mechanical issues are, which type of stabilities or planes of motion you're susceptible to move in and hurt your spondylolisthesis, if you don't know which muscle groups are weak, which muscle groups are over tight, which alignment issues with your posture you have or movement tendencies that you have, you're only fooling yourself if you're going to try to put together any healing exercise program, because you'll simply be doing a generic exercise. And if you haven't yet experienced it, most people with spondylolisthesis or chronic pain, when they do generic tear sheet exercises from their PT or doctor or personal trainer, only wind up strengthening the dysfunction of their problem, leading to more pain in the long run. You don't want to strengthen abnormal mechanics that place more injury and stress on your soft tissues that are already irritated. So learn your RPI. If you're not sure what that is, go to the Posture Size or painfreeandfit.com website. We've got a free body analysis. Check it out. Learn what your RPI, reverse posture isometric, is first, and then you're going to use that and plug it into your exercise program. So talking about the modes, let's talk about frequency of your workouts first. Typically, when you first start, you're going to be using a frequency for strengthening exercises, meaning when you first practice your RPI and learn the coordination of it, you're going to be using the exercises once every 2 to 3 days, meaning you're going to work out 2 to 3 times a week on your strengthening or endurance exercises. Those workouts are geared to increasing the strength of your body and the endurance of your body to hold your RPI or neutral spine position in a safe place while you build the musculature around it. The frequency of daily practice, though, could be every day or multiple times a day if you're practicing the coordination, let's say, of your RPI. If you're learning how to contract your multifidus muscle or your deep erector spinae muscles. Check out our earlier videos on these subjects on our channel here if you're not sure what that is. So daily practice, you could practice because it's not fatiguing. You could practice 1 or 2 or 3 repetitions every hour or half hour or twice a day if you want, because it's not fatiguing and you're just working on coordination. So that could be multiple times a day. If you're interested in stretching, you have, let's say, tight hip flexor muscles because you have an anterior pelvis with your spondylolisthesis or tight hamstrings, you could stretch 2 to 4 times a day. That could be every day in terms of your frequency. If you're working on balance, let's say you have a job or you have a situation in your own personal life where physically you're susceptible to slips, falls, things coming at you, you need balance, you could train balance multiple times a day. Again, practicing that, holding that RPI and watching out for your unique distortions or stability patterns in different planes of motion. Now, what about the intensity of your workout? If you're using an endurance-based program that you're doing a couple times a week, 2 to 3 times a week, you want to use at the beginning of your workouts, when you're first beginning your program, you want to use only 10 to 20% of what's called your rate of perceived exertion, or RPE. A rate of perceived exertion is on a scale of 0 to 10, you're rating how effortful this exercise is. 10 would be maximum effort, I can't do any more than what I'm doing in terms of exerting, and 0 would be I'm not exerting any effort. So for these deep core endurance stability muscles of the spine, to start training them to hold your spondylolisthesis, your segment in a neutral spine position, and training these core muscles, we use a light amount of resistance, so it's not a great resistance, 10 to 20% of a maximum 10, so a 1 or 2 on an RPE scale, and we're going to use that but build up the time that we hold that for over the course of endurance training. Now that brings us into the question of how are we going to progress with this, and we're going to talk about that in the second part of today's video. The Volume of these exercises is going to be based on, at the beginning, 1 to 3 sets per exercise, or perhaps only a 10 to 15 to 20 second isometric hold time. Some motions, for instance, squatting is going to be repetitions up and down, one-legged squats, or let's say stationary lunges or squats. That's going to be up and down or isotonic movements. You're going to use repetitions. So you're going to start with somewhere between maybe 10 and 15 repetitions to practice that. And we'll talk about progression, about going forward from there. But we're always going to be building on our repetitions. Isometric hold times, for instance, if you're doing a front plank even against the wall, where you're training your tail under and your crunch down to prevent an arching in your back and aggravation of your spondylolisthesis, those isometrics can begin at 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and then add on the seconds. We're going to probably add about 2 to 3 seconds, or at least 1 second every workout, so that there's a constant progression going up. Volume is going to increase inherently as you get into better shape. No matter what you're training, whether you're training for endurance or whether you're training for strength or power, it all depends on what your unique needs are as an individual. You're going to be building volume up over time to meet those needs. And that's another important part of designing a program. You want to choose exercises and the modes of exercises to meet what you do. If you're someone that has to be working for a long period of time with a low-level load and not a lot of resistance, then you want to focus on low-level loads, not a lot of resistance. For endurance training, high repetitions, 50 to 100 perhaps, or maybe 200 repetitions. Long isometric hold times, up to 3 to 4 to 5 minutes eventually, as the months and the years continue to hold these positions and improve your spinal stability for your spondylolisthesis. If, however, you're working in heavy labor, or you're an athlete, let's say, and you need to lift heavy weights or push heavy things, then you have to develop the strength, not just endurance, but strength, so you can meet the demands of what you're pushing or pulling or torquing against, so you can hold your neutral spine and spondylolisthesis segment in a safe position. In that case, you're going to be using lower repetitions. You may be working between anywhere 5 to 12 repetitions, but with a heavier weight. If you work with extreme heavy loads, you may have to work in more of a powerlifting type, 1 repetition max to 3 repetition max, meaning that the weight is going to be so heavy, it's going to be 90% to 100% of your maximum ability to push it or pull at one time. You're going to be working with those sets between 1 and 3 reps. So it all depends on what you need for your particular lifestyle. Some of us who have balance issues need to develop a lot of quick power. Athletes also who have explosive movements need to develop power. Power is the development of force, a lot of it, in a very short period of time. So if that's you, you need to practice in unstable environments eventually, which means eyes closed training, standing on one leg exercises, exercises where a friend or a training partner is trying to tap you out of position, and with a lot of load, because if you slip and fall and there's a lot of force, you want to be able to handle that force and balance with it. Make sure that with any of this style of training, you're working within only 1/4 of an inch of body sway. More than 1/4 of an inch of body sway is more likely to injure you. And you slowly grade the volume and the amount of resistance or the weight or the load upwards over several months, if not years, to get to the point where you can balance yourself. You don't want to start practicing balance exercise with a lot of resistance or a lot of load. That's a sure recipe for injury. Now, trying to match the type of muscular contraction to your specific need as an individual is just as important. Muscles work with concentric, meaning lifting or shortening contractions. My biceps, for instance, if I raise up, is a concentric or shortening. They work in eccentric or lowering ways, and they work in isometric or just holding steady ways. So think about what you're needing to do in your daily lifestyle. If your daily lifestyle asks you to lift things up, and the normal lift is a normal speed down, you hold it and lift it up, you need concentric training. Things like squats, things like deadlifts, holding your RPI, the hands together, the hands wide, whatever you're trying to transpose into your daily activities, you want to try to create an exercise program that matches that, the exact same plane of motion and the exact same grip or style of lifting. If, however, you have a job where you have to bend forward, for instance, for extended periods of time, if you're a chiropractor, if you're a dentist, if you're someone like a surgeon who has to go forward for a long period of time, you have to work on isometric exercises that have an eccentric or isometric contraction. Isometric exercises like horizontal squats coming forward, like horizontal holds with one-legged, stiff-legged deadlifts. We've gone over those in several other videos on this channel. You're going to work on longer hold times, and if you have a need to create a lengthening contraction, let's say of the back muscles, because you're going down slowly, then those eccentrics, where you're slowly lengthening down, for instance in this one-legged, stiff-legged deadlift, and then a normal speed coming up, are more suited for you and your particular needs. Now, in my practice, I deal with a lot of athletes and fitness enthusiasts that come in with spondylolisthesis, and they want to learn how to design an exercise program that helps them either get back into the sport that they enjoy or the physical activity. A lot of times, you have to match your coordination and your conditioning program for that spinal stability to meet their unique needs. Someone who's into long distance running, let's say, who uses a lot of the type 1 fibers in their muscles and a lot of oxygen consumption, you're going to have to train them in long-term contractions and cyclical contractions to maintain that spondylolisthesis segment. So what we do with those types of people is we bring them into very short intervals of time in their running form, first learning how to stabilize their spine and then building up to the actual running steps so their mechanics are correct. And we're going to make sure that the endurance fibers of those spinal stability muscles have enough time to build up their length of contraction so they can go for a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 90, 120 minute run. That's all done successively, a little at a time, building that up. We want to make sure if we're dealing with someone who has quick motions, plyometric motions, a garbage man that has to lift things up, an Olympic weightlifter who has to lift things quickly, an athlete that has to sprint or cut to one side, we're going to use that type of contraction, that quick eccentric and then isometric stabilization before we go into a concentric motion the other way. A lot of times we lose stability when we change direction. So if you have a need in your physical lifestyle every day or in your sports or activities where you go from one side to the next, or you go from a forward to a stopping or a rear motion, cutting drills, plyometric jumping, for instance, coming down to the bottom and then jumping up, vertical jumping, broad jumping, side jumping, you want to make sure that you're training that stability at the point of the reversal of the motion. Most times, spondylolisthesis and other instability patterns in the body are going to be brought out and we're going to hurt ourselves when we change directions. So for instance, if you're cutting from right to left, as you eccentrically slow down this way, the moment you change directions from right to left, that's going to be where, let's say, if you have a lateral stability problem, you're going to lean in. That's where you're going to hurt yourself. So that's the point where we want to train that stability in that motion from right to left, where we emphasize holding the stability at a slow speed at first and work up on faster speeds and eventually with jumping so we hold that stability. That's going to allow that person to train their spondylolisthesis stability in a way that's specific for their unique needs. Many people that do endurance long-term work also wind up with fatigue problems that causes instability. People that go for long periods of bike riding, swimmers, joggers, runners, walkers even, hikers, because what happens is as they get more fatigued, their body can't maintain the stability. The muscular coordination starts to decrease, the amount of stability starts to decrease, and longer on in the workout, they start to have pain. One of the problems with these types of patients or clients that I deal with is that they're usually too intense with their long duration workouts. Science has proved that the best type of training for endurance athletes is to only use moderate and high intensity exercise for only 20% of the overall training volume. So let's say if you do 50 miles a week of whatever you're doing, if you're using more than 20% of that as high intensity or medium intensity, you're going to be much more likely not to be able to recover from workouts, and you're going to have much more fatigue, meaning that towards the end of those runs, you're going to be much more likely to lose the spinal stability. When you're stepping in a run and you're asking the glute muscle to contribute its contraction to avoid overarching the back, and you have your abdominal muscles engaged, and you're preventing hip hiking as you're taking a step, if you're fatigued from the previous few workouts in the week, you're not going to be able to hold that. You're going to be much more likely to pinch that facet joint, that disc fiber, that capsule of the synovium. That's going to aggravate your spondylolisthesis pain. So if you're into endurance work or endurance exercises, the key rule or the golden rule to remember is 80% at least of your overall training volume should be at low intensity, and 10 to 20% should be at medium to high intensity. So finally, let's talk about progression. After you've chosen your exercises based on your unique RPI and your stability or ranges of planes of motion, patterns of instability, and you've figured out what your frequency, volume, duration, intensity of your exercises are, let's talk about progression, because that's key for trying to develop the overall theme of your exercise program, which is to be able to hold your spondylolisthesis segment stable and be able to meet the physical stresses that's being applied to it, so you have stability and you don't have instability. So you don't go back into that posture of leaning to one side, of torquing or twisting to one side, of having the tailbone come up, of having that bone slide forward more. The whole idea of the whole conditioning program is you want to be able to strengthen that ability to hold that spondylolisthesis vertebra in a stable position so that the areas around it are not compressing or stretching it. That's going to keep you out of pain. In order to do that, you have to progressively go from one end of a continuum to the other. Your first end in whatever shape you're in presently, the second end obviously is where you want to be to participate in whatever you want to do. Rugby, football, gardening in the yard, or picking up your grandchild. It really doesn't matter. It's specific for each and every one of us. So when we design a program, we want to keep in mind that we want to condition the body to be able to hold our neutral spine and RPI to protect our spine, not only up to where we expect to be needed in our daily or sports activities, but slightly beyond that. Because if we get a little extra insurance policy, it's going to help us have the strength and conditioning to be able to hold our spines in a nice position in those unforeseen circumstances that life always brings us. Sometimes we're asked physically to do things greater than what we do each day. And many times that's going to be the recipe for disaster unless you have that extra conditioning built into your body that you can maintain your spinal position for a longer period of time, under greater loads, during a quicker fall or slip. You see, you want that extra bit of insurance to prevent against spinal instability. So with that said, let's always think with our workouts, and it's going to take us to go from one end of that continuum to the next, a different amount of time for each of us based on where we are and where we want to go. But we always want to make sure that each workout that we're doing is progressive, meaning that for strengthening endurance work that we're doing, let's say 2 to 3 times a week, we want to be increasing by a few seconds on all our isometric hold times each and every workout. If we did 10 seconds on Monday in a side bridge, we want to try 12 seconds on Wednesday, 14 seconds on Friday, 16 seconds next Monday. If we're doing repetitions, let's say, with our Bulgarian split squat, and we're working on our stability as well as our ability to maintain a neutral pelvis, not have an anterior pelvis. As we're doing our Bulgarians, we want to make sure that we're adding a couple reps each workout. Not 5 or 10 reps, but 1, 2, or 3 reps. Over time, we want to progress with the amount of resistance that we have. We never want to add more than 5% of the overall resistance that we're using when we go to the next level. Repetitions can range anywhere for strength work between, like I said, 1 repetition max training, but that's not for most people, up to about 15 to 20 reps. That's a good strength parameter for both upper and lower body. Upper body is going to be a little underneath that. Probably most of the reps that you're going to do is going to be between 5 and 12 reps before you fail. And again, you don't have to work all the way to failure. You're going to work within, it's more important to work within progression than it is failure each workout. For lower body, you can work between 10, 20, even 30 repetitions. But for endurance work, that could go as high as 50, 100, 200, 300 repetitions if you're training for endurance. The key part here is that you always want to think, I want to do a little bit more in terms of repetition or isometric hold time than I did last time. And over the months and the years, I'm using more resistance, more weight, and more challenge as I go on. When planning progression in our workouts, it's important to think about 5 basic levels or 5 different steps that we're going to use. The first step of progression is we want to practice our RPI or our neutral spine position. And as I said before, you can do that every day for a few repetitions because it's not fatiguing. You're not going to do it to a point where I'm exhausted, but you're just practicing how to hold my body, how to engage different muscles. That's our first stage. And we can do that daily multiple times a day. The second stage is learning how to stabilize your spine while you start to move some of the associated muscles and body regions around it. So for instance, you can use the hula exercise, which we've talked about, on our channel where we stabilize the spine, bend our knees, and go through a hula hoop motion. Vertical, horizontal, diagonal, figure eights. All those little changes in motion are challenging the RPI being held. It's very low intensity, you're just using your body weight, but you're bringing up the basic pattern of I've mastered holding my RPI stationary or isometrically in different positions. Now let me challenge that with a little bit of motion in the region. The third part we're going to do is we're going to hold that RPI as we now move through a more global range of motion. Meaning that as opposed to just a little local motion, I'm going to hold that, let's say, while I do chops and while I do diagonal lifts. So a chop is a motion down and across. Let's say I have a rotational instability. I'm going to maintain that with that exercise. And a diagonal lift is up and across. That I'm going to maintain too. So I'm using more body segments now, more of a compound motion as I maintain stability. The next step will be increasing the actual speed and or the amount of resistance. So that fourth phase is going to take these compound motions and we're going to slowly build up the amount of speed from slow speed to slow medium speed to medium fast to fast over a continuum, over several weeks, over several months, all geared towards holding that RPI. If at any stage of progression you fail to be able to hold that RPI, you have to back off and peel back to a previous level and practice holding your RPI there before you add more weight or more speed. And the last or fifth step in progression of your spondylolisthesis program should be to include some type of reflexive training. When we first start, we're in a very controlled environment and consciously holding our posture, holding our muscles tensed in the right way, recruiting the right stability muscles. But as we go on, we want to include some type of one-legged balance, some type of eyes closed, one-legged balance, some type of standing on a stability or wobble board or on a home sofa cushion while we do our exercises or one-legged exercises, because the more instability we program in as we get further down the line or more advanced in our routine, the more we're going to make the ability for the nervous system to hold that spinal segment stable on a reflexive basis where we don't have to think as much. There are three basic patterns or three basic phases of learning motor control for the body. One is very conscious at the beginning, and that's our isometrics and our work that we do at the beginning. Two, we do reflexively mixed training, meaning that we start to pick up one leg and do the same correction. Or we start to do a one-legged squat with the eyes open and we work on that correction. As that gets easier, we make the instability even greater. We perhaps do a one-legged exercise with the eyes closed. Perhaps we stand on a sofa cushion and do the exercise like a lunge that's inherently more unstable than a squat with a friend trying to tap us off as we maintain our correction. The idea is the more instability or challenge for us to hold the RPI, the greater we're going to make a reflex in our body that creates that RPI when we become unstable. And we all have points where we turn quickly, we misstep, we slip, something happens on the athletic field, at home or at the job. We need to have our RPI come on and engage and protect our spondylolisthesis very quickly and very strongly despite the unexpected happening. And that occurs with this balance or reflexive training. The key with balance or reflexive training, remember, is that in any exercise that you're doing, you want to make sure that your body's not wavering more than 1/4 of an inch. Greater than 1/4 of an inch is too unstable. It could hurt you. Training within just a little wobble or 1/4 of an inch motion is acceptable. When that becomes very easy and you can hold that with no wobble, it's time to close your eyes or make it a little harder so that reflex starts to get honed in the body to protect your spondylolisthesis pain. So if we combine the knowledge that we've received in the video part 1 along with this video in part 2, we have a knowledge of finding what our unique stability planes of motions are that we're going to work on, and we're going to be choosing exercises to match those planes. And then we're going to talk about the modes that we're going to choose based on our individual needs and progression inherently built in. Putting these all together is going to allow us to create a program that not only helps stabilize our spondylolisthesis in expected circumstances in our life, but also the unexpected ones, which is where a lot of injuries come from. If you like this video on spondylolisthesis pain and learning how to design an exercise program to prevent it, a healing and stabilization program, feel free to subscribe to our channel. We got a lot of great videos out there. Part 3, we're going to be talking about the typical mistakes people make with building their spondylolisthesis programs and executing the workouts. That's coming up in a couple weeks. And of course, if you're interested in learning how to build your own custom program a little bit more in depth, look no further than our Fast Track Spondylolisthesis program available at painfreeandfit.com. It goes over all your body analysis, coordination, balance, flexibility, strengthening, conditioning, endurance exercises, reflexive training, and a lot to help give you a cohesive way of step-by-step building your own program. And of course, like some of my patients and clients, if you hate reading and doing it yourself, you can always contact me. I'd be delighted to get together with you, and together we can work on a tailored program for your spondylolisthesis needs. I hope this video on exercise mode and progression helps you designing your spondylolisthesis healing exercise program.